Okay, so welcome back. This is Dr. Oscar Hernandez, board certified internist and pediatrician. We've been following a lot of these videos about the COVID outbreak, and there's always new stuff that's developing. So today I want to talk about the importance of not retesting people who are positive for COVID to see if they can go back to work. I know that sounds wrong, but we're going to look a little bit more at that. And we're going to look at a recent article from the New England Journal of Medicine that gives us the phase 1 results of a COVID-19 vaccine. Very encouraging results. We'll come back. Stay tuned. So welcome back. This is Dr. Oscar Hernandez. We're going to talk about what to do if your employer or your job tells you that after you've been known to have COVID-19 with or without symptoms, it doesn't make any difference, that you need to be retested before you go back to work. Well, the recommendation is that we shouldn't do that. And the CDC came out with this guidance on July 17th. You can probably see it there on camera. And it's entitled Overview of Testing for SARS-CoV-2. And one of the important things that they say is that people who have been infected with this virus should stay, unless they have very severe symptoms. This recommendation is for people with mild to moderate symptoms, and for people who are actually asymptomatic and never had symptoms. But from 10 days after you were tested positive or your symptoms began, you should be in isolation. Isolation is different than quarantine. I'll go over that very briefly in a moment because this is a short video. But what we want to do with folks who have tested positive for the virus is to keep them in isolation. I just received a call from one of my patients who wanted to know some specific directions about this because they're getting conflicting recommendations at work from the CDC, from their doctors. There's a lot of hodgepodge of stuff out there. So the stuff I say has to do with CDC recommendations, and I've just quoted to you chapter and verse of this particular study in terms of the name, so that you can look it up yourself. Your employer can look it up themselves. If you've had COVID-19 from the time you were diagnosed with a test or had symptoms for 10 days out, if you have mild to moderate symptoms, you should not be in contact with other people. You should be in a separate room if it's available to you at home, with a separate bathroom, separate towels, separate eating utensils. If you must be in contact with someone, you're wearing your trusty N95 mask, all that kind of stuff. And that goes on for 10 days. If after 10 days you've had at least 24 hours with no fever, without using Tylenol, aspirin, or other things to decrease your fever, then you're good to go. Hit the street, Jack. Now, you're going to hit the street using the universal COVID precautions, right? You're going to maintain 6-foot distance from other people. You're going to continue wearing your masks in public, and you're going to have excellent hygiene practices. So that doesn't mean that you just go out willy-nilly and everything's finished. So we're going to go out. Do you need to be retested? Again, by this CDC criteria that is rather new and a lot of people are not familiar with it, the answer is no. You don't have to be retested. In fact, you shouldn't be retested. Well, how can you say that, doctor? I can still give the virus to little Aunt Lily because I know that I had a friend who was COVID positive 3 weeks after they finished having their infection. Stop. Here's the reason we do not retest. Because when we test people using the nasal swabs, whether for antigen or for other molecular tests like polymerase chain reaction and so on, what we're really sampling is dead, leftover, non-virulent viral particles. And so the idea is that you can test positive all day long, but if you have met that criteria that I just went through, you're not going to infect anybody. There are extremely rare instances where this happens. Don't bet that it's going to happen to you. Now, the problem is that I have a great deal of difficulty explaining to employers what this new recommendation is. Because what have we been told by all the politicians and everybody and their brother? We got to test, we got to test, we got to test. We're getting so sick because we're not testing. We need more and more and more and more testing. Well, the time is coming when we are actually taking people who have been in contact with people who are known carriers of COVID, and we are just telling those people to quarantine. I just talked to you about isolation for 10 days. We use a different term, quarantine, for people who have been in contact with others who are known possibly infectious to somebody else. If this somebody else has had significant contact with a COVID-positive person, we put them in quarantine. Quarantine isn't 10 days. Quarantine is 14 days. And we stay there hoping that we don't develop any symptoms. If after 14 days you don't have symptoms, the same thing. Hit the road, Jack. Again, with your mask, with good hand hygiene, maintaining social distancing, you're good to go. We do not need to test you. Now, here's the thing. The whole testing fiasco, we have a lot of false negative tests, and we're probably underestimating the number of people that we truly have with COVID because these tests have a significant false negative rate, and if you don't do them in the proper window, the test is not going to pick up these viruses. These are complex issues. They're not for this particular video. The next thing I want to talk to you about in this particular video is this fabulous article from the New England Journal of Medicine that came out July 14th. Again, this is rather fresh stuff. And this has to do with what is called a phase 1 trial using an mRNA vaccine against COVID-19 disease. So, by the way, in terms of terminology, SARS-CoV-2 is the virus. The disease is COVID-19. It's a play on words. We often use them interchangeably, and I do use them interchangeably. But just for the sake of clarity, SARS-CoV-2 is the virus. The disease is COVID-19. All right, so this is a vaccine against COVID-19. And there are about 5 different platforms that are currently under investigation throughout the world. Moderna is a company based in Cambridge, Massachusetts. It's a USA company, and its research is partially funded by the National Institutes of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. Well, this phase 1 study is not meant to be conclusive about anything. Before I talk about the study, let's talk about what the phases of a scientific study are. Phase 1 is to help determine whether a vaccine or some certain treatment is safe. So we're looking at high doses often of medications or vaccines or whatever the treatment is that we're looking at to see if it is safe and it doesn't put people in danger. And this is usually done in very small groups of people because remember, we're looking at safety. Phase 2 has to do with the efficacious nature of a vaccine. Does it work? Is it effective? And that's also in smaller groups. Phase 3, we include a lot of people. And we look at safety and we look at efficacy in very, very big groups of people. And we also are looking for side effects that may not necessarily have to do with the safety of not giving the vaccine. So there's all kinds of other things that can happen that are not life-threatening and not a reason to stop something from coming to market. Well, this is a phase 1 study. It is a very early study in a very small number of people, but the results are very encouraging. Now, here's the thing about this particular study. We need to understand that usually vaccination studies and medication studies go on for years before something is approved. But I want you to focus and recognize how quickly we have come in terms of developing a vaccine and certain other treatments, but certainly the vaccine component has been just roaringly fast. By January, we had the genome, in other words, the genetic makeup of this virus. Within 60 days later, Moderna was already producing the basic vaccine material so that we could start a phase 1 trial. And by mid-March, we already had candidates that were getting this phase 1 trial vaccine. So now, a couple of months later, they actually published these phase 1 results. And here's the encouraging news. It was only a small group of people. About 45 people were involved in this particular phase 1 study. All of them developed antibodies against COVID-19, against SARS-CoV-2, against the virus. So everybody responded in the development of antibody production after the first shot. This was a 2-shot series given about 29 days apart. So in phase 1, the first shot developed antibody in all the different doses that were being considered. There was a 25 microgram, a 100 microgram, and a 250 microgram dose that was being looked at in this study. Now, the higher the dose of the shot that they got, the greater the amount of antibody produced. But not all antibody is the same. And so what we really like to look at is what we call neutralizing antibody. Neutralizing antibody is the one that knocks the pants off the virus. This is the antibody that really gets in the face of the virus and says, like Gandalf did in Lord of the Rings, you shall not pass. And so neutralizing antibody was present not after the first shot, but it was present after the second shot, and it was present in every patient, no matter what the dose they were given. The bad news is, and it's not terrible news, the bad news is that a lot of folks did have side effects on this medicine. About half. I didn't look at the numbers right before I did this program, but about half the people did have side effects from the vaccine. Fortunately, none of them were serious side effects, like the ones you can get from a COVID infection, which includes death, right? So fortunately, none of them were serious side effects, and all of them were basically transient. None of them were showstoppers. None of them met the criteria that they were looking for in this particular study to say, stop the study, this thing is unsafe. So what kind of side effects did they have? Well, they had fever, they had pain, they had myalgia, muscle aches, and 3 of the patients that were involved in the study did not get a second dose. One of them, because they developed a pretty bad rash called urticaria, very itchy, kind of all over the body. No respiratory problems, which is something that can happen with urticaria. That didn't happen in this patient. And the other 2 patients were not vaccinated because they were being placed aside. They were in quarantine because we thought they did catch the COVID virus. When they were tested, they didn't catch the COVID virus, but it would have confounded the study if the patients were developing antibody from having had the illness compared to having had the vaccine. So we look forward to the phase 2 study. We're holding on, hoping that the vaccine is a little closer. When this whole thing started, I was asked many, many times, when are we going to have a vaccine? And those questions were coming my way about March of this year. And I would kind of look at people and say, hey, talk to me in a year. It could be that we have a good vaccine candidate early by 2021 or maybe in late 2020. Now, when the president said that we would have a vaccine somewhere before the end of the year, there was a lot of laughter, as there often is. Hey, it looks like that might be possible. No assurances. We'll see what happens. Let me remind you of something that I've mentioned on this program before. There's a lot of bad news. There's a lot of pain. There's a lot of wear and tear out there. I've mentioned this biblical verse before. I want to mention it again. It's Philippians chapter 4, verse 8. In the New Testament, the Apostle Paul goes around preaching the Word of God and proclaiming Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior. Well, he gets beaten, he gets thrown in jail, he gets ridiculed, he gets mocked, he gets shipwrecked. Eventually he gets arrested, taken to Rome, and his head is chopped off. Now, if you don't think that people make fun of the Christian faith back in the day, it's always been going on. So if you're a believer, take heart. And if you're not a believer, then please, be compassionate to other people, because we want to do unto others as we would want them to do unto us. But this fellow, who had gone through so much scourge and problems, toward the end of his life, writes a letter to a Christian group of people in Philippi, a city in Greece. And he says, chapter 4, verse 8, I've mentioned it before, I want to end with this. I want to encourage you, if anything is good, if anything is beautiful, if anything is kind, these are the things that we need to feed ourselves in. Otherwise, folks, we're going to become very sad people who wind up doing things that we shouldn't do. People go to drugs, people go to alcohol, people sometimes get into fights and in family discord. They might even take their life because there's so much trouble going on. Clear your mind, reflect on this passage, read a lot more about this, take a deep breath, count to 10. We will come out of this. This is going to be going on for a while. Vaccine or no vaccine, we're going to be fighting with this hand and fist for a long time. But we're going to come out of it. Life will go back to normal, and hopefully we'll be smarter, better, and stronger. We'll be back next week. Remember, if you like the program, thumbs up. You gotta subscribe. If you don't subscribe, you're not going to get these on an ongoing basis. So if you're a first-time watcher and you've gotten something out of this program, please subscribe. let's keep you here on the gravy train getting information about COVID. And I look forward to the day when we talk about a ton of other stuff that I'd love to talk to you about. But right now, we're COVID, so we're fighting and we're in this together. I'll see you next time.